trim on this airplane is really pretty sophisticated. It is actually powered from a Garmin adapter device. The trim switches themselves in this are not driving any power, and in your joysticks, which this trim will be in the joystick, that's a lot of times the reason in smaller aircraft you'll a lot of times see panel mounted trim is because those trim switches can be, if that goes, how are you going to trim the aircraft? Now, the nice thing about most planes like this is trim is not life and death. There's a lot of aircraft, especially fast ones, things like Moonies, that anything that adjusts the entire incidence of the tail can be really dangerous to operate without trim control. This airplane, even if you're totally out of trim, all you're worried about, I mean, it's horrible to fly, but you're just worried about landing, or theoretically, I guess, taking off if you weren't paying attention and then you realized you didn't have trim on takeoff. It's just fine. You don't even notice that the aircraft is out of trim for takeoff and landing because everything is such relatively low speed. And it is a trim tab. Now, that's one good thing about trim tabs. They're not as fast, but if they're not working, the aircraft is still typically pretty flyable. This particular aircraft, the trim switches are on the joystick for convenience, because that's really, really, really where you'd kind of like to have them. And they are ground signals only, and what that means is there's no real current that's going through them. There's a Garmin adapter device actually up in the dash that is just looking for a ground signal, and it's just basically got a light voltage, and as soon as it sees a ground, i.e. when you hit this button, it sends power out from another source, totally irrelevant to this switch. Now, in this case, for some added features, I'm running it through my Garmin autopilot pitch servo. And when you do that, Garmin has set things up to where you can go into your G3X and you can have automatic speed control, just willy-nilly like the big boys. And what that'll do is your trim switches, instead of, you'll see guys sitting there and they're like, tapping that button, trying to get that trim just perfect. You can go in there and say, hey, everything above 100 miles an hour indicated airspeed, or 120 indicated, whatever, travel at 5%. And so you basically set it up on a curve. Long story short, the faster the aircraft flies, the less sensitive the trim switches are. The more sensitive they are when you're down at landing speed, so below 60 miles an hour or 70 miles an hour. The trim motor runs really fast to make quick adjustments, because obviously at those speeds it would be sluggish, but where it's really fast, and I don't know if, especially in like a Cessna or something, you're sitting there and you get it trimmed, but you're still walking down, and then you go up, and now you're walking up, and then you go down, and now you're walking down, and you're just like, okay, up 3, down 2, trying to get to where it'll just sit there, especially when you don't have an autopilot. Well, in this plane now, that you don't have to worry about that because you actually have speed control. So if you're moving really fast, or like in cruise, your trim switches move so slowly that you can just sit there and get it exact. On top of that, it has trim position sensing. So on your screen, you'll get a graph, and you can put your hex marks like, hey, this is my cruise speed. You can save a mark there, and it'll stay on there, and you can just, instead of trying to wait and see and watch your vertical speed indicator, you can just run your trim right up to that bar and you're good. And when you're coming in for landing or your approach, you can go to approach setting, you can go to landing setting, you can go to takeoff setting, and you can have all these pre-saved settings, and it crops up right on your G3X, and you can just run those trim switches, and then you have a visual. And if your trim motor isn't working, you'll see it on there as well. Which they're pretty reliable. In fact, they're really reliable, but in the event that it wasn't running. So that speed control is enabled through the autopilot. Now, here's the other thing that this does, this whole system. Like I say, this trim system is about as, it's kind of sophisticated like the big aircraft, is the plane can auto trim. So if you're in autopilot mode, the autopilot will actually run, or the G3X, the mode controller of this, will run the trim itself. Since it's running the trim power through the autopilot servo. The autopilot servo is actually controlling the sending out. It's doing the speed scheduling and all that stuff. So it can auto trim, and essentially what that means is when the autopilot's flying, rather than just manually running the joystick, which is your big, elevator and ailerons, it will just sit there and run the trim. If it just needs a small adjustment, it'll just trim the aircraft out. What that means is when you kick the autopilot off, at any point in time, the aircraft is perfectly trimmed for hand flying. Secondly, it has a neat little safety feature in that if this autopilot servo or the whole autopilot system is not on or is turned off or isn't working or whatever, it can have completely shut off, even though this is the thing sending out the power. It has a fail-safe pass-through power, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to, even if essentially this is now your source of trim power, even if this thing is shut off, it is going to have an emergency trim power that is going to allow you to trim the aircraft even when it doesn't have any power. And it's just going to use a pass-through energy source from the Garmin adapter device. And what it'll look like though is you'll lose your speed scheduling. So your trim motor is just going to run at a constant rate of speed, but at least you can in fact trim the aircraft. So it's pretty cool. So you get all of the features of the big boys without losing any of the reliability. It's really just kind of amazing in a small airplane like this that you can have that level of autopilot capabilities and even trim capabilities, feedback, and it's not like those little, trim indicator positions where you got like 6 lights and, they'll let you know when you're out of trim, but other than that, they're relatively meaningless. It's an extremely, extremely fine in millivolts is how it measures that setting. Extremely fine measurement of your trim position, so you can just get it exact visually without having to wait for the aircraft to settle out and hope that you're in the right position and then figuring out that you're not. The usual trim hunting that we all used to do in those, well, I guess most of the aircraft that are in the sky now. Garmin is really kind of gone next level on that trim, especially when you can just adapt it so easily and perfectly to a small aircraft like this. It's really pretty incredible.